everybody. Good morning still, and thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be a fantastic discussion with some incredible local South Florida leaders. So happy to have you all here. Bernardo, John, and Michelle, welcome. I will give a very brief introduction to each of our panelists, and then we'll get started with some conversation topics around looking at Miami as America's emerging technology hub, which is a conversation that for those of you who've been here or who've had the occasion to come to Miami a couple of times, hopefully over the last decade, it's been a very top of mind and pertinent conversation here. It's been evolving. It is not a relatively recent discovery, but it has accelerated in the last couple of years. So I'm really excited to talk about it with all of you. Starting on my left is Bernardo Scheinkman, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Smart Cities Americas. He'll tell us a little bit more about that soon. John, further down the line is John how do I pronounce your last name? Wensveen, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at Nova Southeastern University and the Executive Director of the Levan NSU Broward Center for Innovation. As a graduate of university school, I went to high school at NSU, so I'm very personally happy to see this development at the university. We'll hear about that soon. And Michelle Abbs, who is a leader in the community and also a personal friend and has held many hats, which I'm sure she will address as she answers questions, but is most recently the founder and CEO of Web3 Equity. So welcome to all of you. So Michelle, let's start with you. Let's kind of work our way back. You've seen many sides of Miami's entrepreneurial ecosystems, from the startup side, the education side, the community building side, the urban innovation and real estate side over these many years. Help us set the stage, especially for those in the audience who are a bit less familiar with Miami, kind of what you've observed over the last decade and what has happened with this recent acceleration.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the introduction, and it is lovely to be here and to have this discussion and this topic in our lovely home of South Florida. I am excited that you all are experiencing firsthand the sort of intangible feeling that many of us as South Florida residents have been experiencing and been very inspired by over the past couple of years. But Natalia is right to contextualize this in terms of what has happened. What are the antecedents to what is happening right now? So actually, I'll go a little bit further back than just a decade, to 2 decades ago, when we saw sort of the first trailblazers take hold of what will be then later, a few decades later, some of the really major brands in technology that have been built in Miami. So around the early 2000s, you saw Manny Medina of Medina Capital really double down on data and technology. And he constructed an entire data center that you still see as you drive over the highways in downtown Miami. Around that same time, Dr. Maurice Ferre, really doubled down on technology and pharmaceuticals, and went all in with Mako Pharmaceuticals. And what I think happened after both of those companies in the early 2000s saw a meteoric rise, they then gave birth through their IPOs and acquisitions to various other technology leaders and technology companies that came after that around 2010 to 2015. And I still think 10 years ago, Miami tech ecosystem did not have a name. It did not have an identity. It did not have a core community or gathering place. And so between that, sort of 2010 to 2015 mark, I think is when we started to see more than just trailblazers who formed companies. Now we started to see ecosystem collaboration and curation. And so a lot of that, I think, started with funding of the Knight Foundation, who chose to award grants and dollars to community organizations that were gathering people together. We saw our first co-working space in the Lab Miami that was launched, and then later we saw the Cambridge Innovation Center that Natalia ran. And I think co-working spaces were a huge part of that ingredient then that started the flywheel. In addition to that, we started seeing more acquisitions. And so we started having founders who had a founder story from, ideation, curation, funding, raises to acquisition. And we started learning from them. And so I think there were a lot of the antecedents and the ground was ripe once the more international spotlight was shown upon Miami in the past 2 years.
Thank you. John, we're going to skip you over for a second. Bernardo, we talk very often about Miami in the context of the hemisphere, right? Miami is kind of an Alexandria of the hemisphere in terms of its potential and its history in terms of connecting between the northern and the southern hemisphere here. The role of Miami in the Americas has changed and has been evolving over recent decades. You have worked at that intersection for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about how you've seen it evolve and how you see it playing a role moving forward.
Okay. Thank you. There was a period in South Florida, Miami, that the people come here just for vacation and sometimes go to, for example, Orlando. Then start a campaign from the Beacon Council and Great Miami Chamber of Commerce and start as gateway of the Americas. So attracting companies, business to Miami, to South Florida. Recently, we see a change in this because we have a very good support in terms of education. We have good universities, good colleges, good schools. And because of that, we can bring more technology. That's the moment that we are living right now. Of course, that we need to do more. We need to take in consideration that when we attract companies, organizations, people that's going to work, we need to support young people, adults, and aging people. In this way, we need to create opportunities to work and to live with quality of life. Okay? Beside of that, we have diverse technology support here in South Florida. It's growing. And because of that, we are attracting venture capital. We are attracting companies from other countries to start operation here. And this is growing. And we have the private sector, thank you. We have the private sector very strong, bringing venture capital, bringing people, knowledge. And beside of that, we have the support from the public sector. So this is growing and is a big opportunity to bring and to start operation. Beside of that, we know that Miami is #1 for startups in US, according to the Kaufman Foundation, and also to attract investment from outside, according to the Financial Times, Nikkei Index is the #1 in US. So we are open to bring more innovation, to bring more companies, and beside of that, we need to take care of quality of life. In terms of quality of life, we have some challenges here in terms of affordable housing, mobility. And this is a very important opportunity right now for the technology sector that bring innovation so we can have more affordable housings and we can have more mass transportation. Okay.
Thank you for sharing. John, back to you. Walk us a little bit through how NSU sees its role in the community and kind of in the larger context of how academic institutions have been evolving locally.
All right, thank you, and good morning. Pleasure to be with you today. So NSU is the largest private university in the state of Florida, and in Florida we have public and private institutions, and the advantage to being private is that we can be run like a business. We can be entrepreneurial, we can be high-tech, and what we see our role in South Florida as is really an innovator that's going to flip the academic model on its head. And because we're entrepreneurial and because we treat it like a business, we're very much in line with what industry needs are. And there's a global trend that's been occurring for a number of years. higher education institutions in the public and private sector have become increasingly disengaged with industry. So you see a lot of big industry partners talking to each other. They're sharing the same coffee and the bagel, but they're not exactly putting the cream cheese on it together. And what I mean by that is that there's a huge talent skills gap that has been emerging year over year. And now that we have this growing focus on emerging technologies, there's technology that we know of today, and there's technologies that we're not even aware of yet. We're not really prepared for the future. And if you look statistically at academic institutions around the world, the number that are actually in business today is declining. Every single day, an institution is closing its doors because of the gap that continues to widen between the academic sector and industry. So there's an easy solution to all of this. The challenge is that with academic institutions is they often offer programs that are not relevant to industry needs for the short, medium, and the long term, and there's all kinds of exceptions across the board. But in order to cater to industry, we have to listen to industry in terms of what their needs are. We can't dictate to industry what we think their needs are, which often happens. And it's time to start sunsetting, closing down programs that are no longer relevant and starting to focus on programs that are more relevant to industry. So industry often complains that we're not getting qualified, skilled talent. And in many cases that's true, but of course there's exceptions all over the world around that. And I think that here in South Florida, the academic institutions are pretty well linked into industry, but we have a long way to go in terms of being co-invested with industry. So with that said, I'm not going to knock on the academic institutions. I'm going to knock on the door of industry for a moment. That if you're going to complain that you can't get skilled talent that you desperately need, then you better start co-investing into higher education and really starting at an even lower level. And there's a whole life cycle. So if you think about somebody being born through their preschool, their kindergarten, their middle school, high school years, their undergraduate, their graduate degrees, their professional schools, or let's not forget about other forms of training that don't involve degrees, because degrees aren't the end game for education. We have to think about more accelerated ways to get people into the workforce that are non-degree training applications. The word apprenticeship is not a sexy word, but I will tell you it's going to become a more sexy word, and maybe we have to brand that in the future. But that's about getting paid people into the workforce today at an accelerated pace with stacked industry credentials that allow industry to hire the talent. So we're very much focused. We're going through a huge transition from a traditional academic institution to a more innovative institution that's focused on stacked credentials, degrees and non-degrees, co-investing with industry and industry co-investing with us and offering programs that are relevant to those training talent needs that we so desperately need, especially around technology. And I don't think that we'll ever be able to fill all of the technology jobs that are vacant anywhere in the world. It's just going to keep on growing and growing and growing, but we have to start doing a more accelerated, making a more accelerated effort so that we can fulfill, like plug some of the holes as we move forward.
Thank you. And kind of double clicking on that, I think most people in the audience probably understand what you mean by alternative models of both degree, non-degree, educating, kind of creating that viable pathways for kind of workforce development pipelines. Can you give us some examples of what else, or kind of how the private sector can get engaged? When you mean co-investment, what does that look like in the real world, and what would you most want private sector to come to the table with?
So I'll give you a current case study that's in the making. We just constructed a 54,000 square foot innovation center. It's now legally protected as the world's first theme park for entrepreneurs. And what we did is we set up a public-private partnership between NSU, the university, and Broward County, which is the greater Fort Lauderdale area. And both parties came together and invested in the build-out and construction of this incredible theme park where there are a lot of rides, and each one of these rides has some kind of return on investment for all stakeholders. And we are not owned by anybody. We're very independent, so I call it Switzerland. So internally, our job is to break down the silos that exist within an academic environment so that all of the subject matters are coming together to collectively work as one. And it's multidisciplinary in approach. And we look at how we can help support current degree programs, future degree programs, non-degree related programs. And then we act as Switzerland for industry. So how do we have an impact with industry partners on the outside? And what we do is we actually bring these big branded industry flags into the innovation center where they're physically resident, and then we put their brand on a door and we put innovation labs next to their name. And the job of industry is to actually get into the DNA of the university system, including our university school, which is our private school, for high school students that also embed themselves in the Innovation Center. And then what we do is we look to commercialize ideas. We look to help with entrepreneurship at these large companies where they have a challenge, and we come up with solutions by bringing in our own students, our faculty, our staff, and other partners that we're working with. And there are a number of examples that have occurred just in the last year where some of these big brands are more innovative than they were a year ago or 2 years ago, because we were able to address solutions that also included creating more talent for their environments at an accelerated pace. So new skills, upskills, and reskilling are a huge concentration for what we're doing in a university environment. You really don't hear the word workforce. You hear that in the community college system across the nation, but our university is very much focused on workforce moving forward, and we are asking industry, what are your needs? What do you need now and in the future? What kind of programs do you need, do your current employees need, so that they're always more skilled at what they're doing? And are you willing to actually put financial hard cash on the table to help with the infrastructure and the programming that's so desperately needed? And we're finding that we're making a lot of headway, and it's really making an ask. And for some reason, academic institutions are really scared to make an ask. And you can't be shy, and if you're turned down, that's fine. That's not the right partner. You go on and you move on and you find the right partners. But we've had some successes and some failures, but those that get what the future looks like, because the future is here now, we're just not prepared for it. You have to change the mindset of the culture in which you operate.
Thank you. Michelle, speaking of talent, how have you observed the talent and founder pool change over the recent years? And you've been here for 15 years plus. So how have you observed a change over your time here? And what is needed to attract and retain talent here?
Yeah, I'm going to double click on talent and the education piece, just because I think there's a lot of synergy in where those two pieces collide. So I actually started my career in Miami as a teacher. I taught fifth grade for 4 years in part of sort of the downtown Miami area called Liberty City. And that area and the students in that area were often really underestimated. And so the role, you know, as a teacher was a lot of this mindset piece in addition to skills. But I saw incredible talent even from the minds of our fifth graders and the way that they saw the world. I think there is something very special about living in Miami that is a very multicultural place that allows kids, even from a very young age, to see the world with a global perspective. And then I transitioned from being an educator to work at an ed tech startup in Miami. And what was really interesting, you know, in terms of the talent and that experience was we had two offices. We had the Miami office and the San Francisco office. And the Miami office, I helped launch our customer success team. And we had our sales team in Miami. But aside from that, the sort of critical strategic thinking roles were all housed in San Francisco. And so while, you know, we were a team that was part of a, you know, very fast growing ed tech startup that, you know, eventually sold for over $700 million, in Miami, we were sort of relegated to some of the more remedial tasks, or remedial roles, if you will, and the really high-level strategy still lived in San Francisco. And I think that was a trend in Miami. I think that you know, tech companies were not sure whether they could trust Miami yet in terms of talent, right? And it was a little bit of testing ground, right? And let's see what these teams can deliver. Let's see who percolates to the top of leadership in these places, and then, you know, we'll double down and give some more leadership. Now, after working with that ed tech startup, I left to work for a higher ed institution, and I ran an accelerator program. And everything that was just shared around, you know, sometimes the mindsets and beliefs of higher ed institutions is sometimes unfortunately true. You know, higher ed institutions, some of them are more than 2 centuries old. Right? This is really, you know, some institutional approach to the way of doing things that doesn't often lend itself to the flexibility and nimbleness that, you know, growth in the business sector demand. And so the program that I ran was for female founders who had a startup to help increase the amount of capital that they were able to raise. Because what we know is that less than 3% of venture capital goes to female-founded companies. And so in the course of the 3 years that I was running that accelerator, we saw over the 3 years, 60 female-founded companies go through that program. And in terms of talent, I mean, you had incredibly innovative ideas that were ready to scale, on a micro level here, then nationally, and then globally. You had some, sort of lifestyle businesses. You had some incredible SaaS companies. But ultimately, I think there still was a reticence from both funders and, other sort of institutional players in really backing these founders. And so I think we have elements of talent that I've seen and witnessed over the past 15 years, but I think it was until COVID opened the doors and what we started seeing was more headquarters in the cloud, where talent was then choosing where they wanted to live instead of where that business was located, where they felt the most happy and the most great work-life balance. And we started then seeing more of different pockets of talent come to Miami. And I think it's important to note that a lot of, the folks who have come to Miami, there's sort of two camps of them that I've observed. Ones that have worked really hard to integrate into the local ecosystem. They're hiring locally, and when they, can't, they're really seeking out those local partnerships. And then there are groups who have come and they've said, we simply live here and we work here, and this happens to be where we are. We're not necessarily going to integrate. And I think it will be interesting to see which of those strategies bodes well in the future. My bet is on, the collaborative approach, because I think there is something, again, very important in the talent pool and in the lived experience of a place like Miami that, folks who are simply importing talent are missing out on.
Thank you. Bernardo, you kicked us off mentioning also in your first answer, a couple of challenges: housing, mobility, kind of some more infrastructure topics. And as we've seen in other, quote unquote, and I don't say quote sarcastically, but just cities that we've designated as tech hubs, we've seen a bit of a techlash against some of the stressors that are being placed on urban and economic development infrastructure because of the population shifts coming from tech workers. What, in your opinion, given that some of these topics are intersections that you're very invested in and work actively in, can Miami do to hopefully avoid or prevent that, or plan differently?
Okay, I'm an optimist about the future here. First of all, usually here in South Florida, when we talk about Miami, it's Miami, then Broward, then Palm Beach. Now we are breaking silos, and we are working as
Microphone.
a toll. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, I was talking like an Italian, so pa.
Your left hand.
Yeah.
I could just injure.
So, hello. So we are now breaking silos and work as a whole. Because of that, we are bringing more innovation, more activities, and we have activities almost every day related to the region. What's very, very positive. Besides of that, the engagement of the people and the support from the educational infrastructure is really, really very important. So we have the young people, students, we have the adults, and we have the Asian people. What we need to do now is to give more support in terms of mobility, because, to come here today, for example, it's 1 hour or sometimes more. Besides of that, we need to have public transportation. And the way that the cities here was built for cars, and we need to change that. So we have our own cars, and because of that, we have a mess in terms of I-95 or any other, let's say, infrastructure that we use. So we need to invest more. We need to use technology for transportation, We need to use technology to build different. Today, the way that we build, I'm architect urbanist, so I learn a little bit about that. We build buildings with concrete. We have roads with asphalt. And then we have the cars, tires. And this created the heat. We need to change. We need to change that, the way we build. So there are now some initiatives here in US, in other countries, using mass timber to building, including buildings, houses and buildings, everything, instead of using concrete. And beside of that, we need to invest in terms of technology to support aging people, because we know that aging people has experience in life, but they need more support right now. Here today, we have more support for young people because we are talking about startups, we are talking about new companies, but we need to invest also in aging people, because the aging people has knowledge, experience, and we need to bring this. So in this way, we need to work together to bring mass transportation, change the way that we build here in South Florida, buildings. We need to have more the concept of porous city. The porous city, because we have flooding here. With the flooding, the water cannot reuse, and you need to reuse this water that came. So we need to use technology for that, and there are plenty of things. That's the way that I see the future. Bringing more support for everybody in terms of young people, adults, and Asian people.
Thank you. John, looping back to you, I think when we look at cities or communities like the Bay Area, Boston, one of the not so secret elements of the kind of magic sauce of their thriving tech ecosystems has been the rabid, I would say, commercialization out of academic institutions. South Florida still kind of lags. There's some room for improvement on that. Can you tell us a little bit how we stack up against that and how we improve on that?
So it's kind of like opening Pandora's box to answer that one, but I'll do my best to simplify it. So leading universities all over the world have been very good at commercializing their research because they invest into the infrastructure and the network, the relevant resources to make that happen. South Florida is really been at the bottom of the list for a number of years in terms of commercialized research. But there's an accelerated approach that's been happening over the last decade, the last 5 years, and interestingly, over the last 2 years. And for all of the negative things that a global pandemic brings, it was actually a very positive thing in terms of research for South Florida, where institutions were forced to address challenges that they never thought would ever even enter a discussion at any point in time. And we've been very strategic in helping implement solutions to get the world back to a, in quote, normal order. Now, when you start comparing ourselves to other regions around the country, and let's just take the Bay Area, or take Austin or New York or Boston and others along those lines, the thing that they have that we don't quite have yet are full ecosystems. And ecosystems usually have 11 different elements. And I'm not going to go through all 11 elements, but right now we have 8 or so of those 11 elements. So we have some plugs that we have to put into the holes at the moment. And what's happening is we're in a period of transition. We're the Wild West right now in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, and technology. And there's more collaboration that's occurring that's ever happened in terms of public and private sector coming together. And for all of the negative things that have happened during the global pandemic, if you put a map on the wall, a lot of it has now flown in or kind of made its way into Florida in terms of people, resources, infrastructure, opportunities. And quite frankly, we have so many opportunities that we can't even support all of the opportunities because of other infrastructure issues that we have, whether it's what Bernardo said with mobility, or maybe it's the talent skills that Michelle touched on, or it's transportation. But all of that aside, one thing that we're still missing here is the influence of federal government investing into our communities, where they actually create their own incubators and accelerators that contribute to those research and ecosystems that exist at universities and colleges in the public and private sector. And if you name any really high-tech region in the country, you'll see that the federal government is heavily invested into those areas to really complement, and that's an area that we're lacking on. So we have to do a better job of convincing the powers that be that South Florida is truly on fire, because it is the hottest region in the country. It was stated earlier, we are #1 in terms of startups, but we also fall currently at about 38 out of 40 listed cities in terms of our ability to scale, meaning that we don't have enough talent to be able to get to the next level. But that's changing, and it's changing very rapidly. And if we sit on this stage 5 years from now, it'll be a similar but different discussion. We're going to have more successes in terms of commercialized research, but many of our institutions here, although they may call themselves research institutions, they're not on the same level as other research institutions across the country. And we have a few exceptions to that here in South Florida. But in order to be a research institution, you also have to recruit and retain and invest in research faculty, not class-based faculty, but research-based faculty. And then what we have to do is create pathways that creates a different mindset for researchers. So they're not thinking as an academic, but more as a business person, an entrepreneur, an innovator, a technologist, where they can recognize that the research that they're doing isn't always a white paper and a conference proceeding presentation or sitting on a panel. It's an actually legitimate product. So we think of probably the most successful product that ever came out of Florida that was commercialized out of an institution is Gatorade. So how do we have the next Gatorade, the next 50 Gatorades, the next 100 Gatorades, and that comes back to the academic institutions changing their infrastructure and mindsets to hire researchers, but then investing in them and giving them incentives. That means attracting talent from other regions of the world. It also means home-growing your talent. And if you ask a professor, what's the worst thing about your job? They say, I don't get any resources. So how do we change that so that there's an actually incentive to commercialize? But there's a much bigger discussion, but those are the basics.
Thank you for a really thorough but condensed overview. So Michelle, switching gears, kind of totally switching gears from research, Miami feels like one of the cities at the center of kind of a global Web3 paradigm shift. Tell us a bit about what you observed being smack in the middle of it.
Yeah, so this is the part I think I get the most excited about when I think about the future of Miami and its potential. So, you know, we are, I really think, at the dawn of a technological innovation that will shape our day-to-day lives for decades to come. And I'm referring to Web3, and Web3 broadly defined as the future of the internet, right? And that is powered by blockchain technology. And blockchain technology will, once it's in its full form, you won't even be able to notice that you are using blockchain technology, but everything will sort of be powered by that. And I think that, you know, we've seen different cities really kind of establish themselves as the hub for certain sectors. And this Web3 and blockchain movement is up for grabs right now. And I think we are seeing a lot of energy condense in Miami. Last year around this time, I planned a conference during Art Basel. Art Basel is our international art, you know, premier art festival that happens the first week of December. And at that time, I was working for a real estate developer who had a tech division that I was heading up. And I said, you know, the fusion of art and tech really is NFTs. And so what does it look like to host a conference on this topic? And after hosting that conference and having 5,000 people attend and really, you know, be curious and hungry to learn about that technology, that sort of launched this more community-wide interest. And I started receiving a lot of questions, especially from females that I had, you know, worked with in the former accelerator that I mentioned. And I not only began to be excited about the technological potential that Web3 represents, but also a potential moment of reckoning to level a playing field. And so I founded Web3 Equity, and equity is an intentional play on words meant to ensure that Web3 is gender equitable. I also mentioned the statistic that we see, you know, less than 3% of venture capital funding goes to female founders. And part of that, I believe, is because the system of venture capital was born in the late 1960s in a room with 12 white men. And what happens when a system is created by a, you know, sort of a unilateral, monochromatic group of people that does not represent the diversity of the world, we have problems 60 years later. So I think not only does the technology of Web3 represent something special, but it represents a moment in time where if we call to action to have more women, more people of color, more marginalized groups building that foundational infrastructure, my hope is that in decades to come, we aren't trying to, reverse the patterns of that, architecture from the beginning. And so I think we're seeing this incredible interest in folks learning about the topic. Web3 Equity is an educational community, and we were hosting, local events, and this caught the attention of the mayor, Mayor Francis Suarez, and he said, let's broaden this. And we actually launched a collection of NFTs called the Tuttle Tribe. And yes, so Tuttle Tribe is named after Julia Tuttle. And Julia Tuttle is the mother of Miami. Miami is the only major US city that was founded by a woman. So in 1892, before women had the right to vote, when Henry Ford had just put cars on the road, Julia Tuttle moved down to Miami and bought 600 acres of land and established this, ground that we now stand on as a city. That's incredible to have that stat. And so, we really wanted to sort of live up to that legacy of Julia Tuttle. And so the community has grown in interest, and, we're educating and onboarding women. And I think what we're seeing at a very more grassroots community level is also matched at a more macro level. So there were over 200 venture capital deals done in the first 6 months of 2022. And over 20 of them were in the crypto and blockchain space, but they account for more than 1/3 of the total $3 billion venture capital dollars that were invested in South Florida. So what that shows me is that not only is there interest at the ground level, great, we want to attend events and, learn about technology, but there are actual corporations moving here. There are, hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in the technology. So I think, Miami is poised to benefit on seeing, both the macro and micro level come together.
Thank you. And John and Bernardo, I'm going to kind of loop back on a topic that Michelle raised. I would love your perspectives on this idea of equity and inclusion and how we build a South Florida technology ecosystem that hopefully leapfrogs over some of the gaps and inequities that communities like San Francisco have become known for. We have a unique perspective here because, as we know, especially looking at Miami-Dade County, more than 0.5% of our population is foreign-born. The Kaufman Index that you yourself referenced has some really impressive statistics and figures on kind of the entrepreneurial nature of immigrants, which obviously most of our community here is. So we have some really incredible raw materials to hopefully ensure that our technology ecosystem is not just global, but is also deeply inclusive and diverse. What are your perspectives on that? How are you seeing that take shape? What is promising to you about that? What do you think we need? Both of you.
In fact, we have, let's say, like you said, a nice perspective in terms of what's happening. We have the public sector giving support, and beside of that, we have the private sector coming and bringing in developing technology. Beside of that, we have investment. So we have a kind of combination that we can grow and create more than 20,000 green jobs for the next 3 to 4 years. This, according to studies that I know from Miami-Dade County and Broward at least, could generate $40 billion investment in 3 years. With this kind of investment, we can grow in terms of the good technology. And when I talk about good technology, I'm talking technology that protects people and not control people. In this way, we can work as a society and bring transportation, mass transportation. We can bring more quality of life in terms of use of technology. For example, we have few challenges here in terms of sea level, hurricanes, flooding, and we need to use technology for that. And sometimes the people confound that the technology is just digital. There are other ways. When we build a building, for example, it's technology. We are using technology. When we use, for example, nature-based solutions that we can bring the water, for example, for a big swimming pool, we reuse this water, okay? This is technology. So we need to, let's say, think out of the box and not only just digital, because most of the people think about the digital. What's not bad, but we need to do more. Beside of that, we have, and I mentioned this before twice, a very good support from the educational infrastructure here. So when you see the Nova Western University with the Innovation Lab, when you see Miami-Dade County, and in Broward also we have in Palm Beach, we are open minds and bring things different, okay? The people in terms of public service here, they need to think a little bit different. And this is going to be if we bring the citizens for the decision process. And this is happening now, because when you look about Miami-Dade County or the city of Miami or Broward and Palm Beach, they change the technology so we can use their portal and come with ideas. So this is one way to engage people. But we need to do more. We need to go to the meetings. We need to discuss things. In this way, we are going to grow better and faster.
So on the subject of equity and inclusion, this is a really great conversation because, number one, you have to define what equity is, you have to define what inclusion is, and there's not a single definition. It encompasses a lot of different definitions. And I have to say that South Florida has an advantage over other regions anywhere else in the country. You just look around at how diverse our region is, whether it's Miami-Dade County, Broward County, Palm Beach County. It is truly a melting pot. And one of the areas that I think that we have to do a much better job on is how we serve underserved communities, underserved zip codes. And in a previous role, I had some data in front of me at one point specific to Miami-Dade County, and I was overwhelmed by the percentage of the population that does not have access to the internet. And at the time, it was 65%. So when you see Ferraris and Lamborghinis cruising down the beach, you think, oh, it's a very wealthy, rich environment, of which it is. But it's also important to note that much of the wealth that you see was earned in other places and it's spent here in South Florida. And therefore, we have a huge population that often is not recognized. So how do we improve upon that? Number one, we have to be much aware of those, again, the definitions of equity and inclusion. We have to know where the gap areas are. And to me, at the end of the day, it's about achieving economic prosperity for all. So how do academic institutions become not just economic development engines, but education development engines at the same time? And how does industry also serve that same role by being very much aware about what the gap areas are and investing into those communities so that everybody rises to that level of economic prosperity? One thing that we're doing to make our little dent in the system is we went and fought very hard to secure a pretty substantial federal grant opportunity where we're now about to start building an innovation center on wheels, a true transformer that can bring an innovation center around the themes of innovation, technology, and entrepreneurship to underserved communities throughout all of South Florida. And we're not going to use it just to the benefit of our university and our innovation center. We're actually creating this resource so that's available to anybody in our community, any academic institution, any government entity, any industry, where they'll be able to utilize it for their own needs, to take it to certain events or certain environments to work on those problematic areas. And it's a long, long time before we'll ever resolve these issues, if we ever do, but we have to start making our dent. As I conclude, I used to work at another institution sponsored on the wall behind me, Miami-Dade College. And I remember at one point somebody asked our leadership, how come you don't have a chief diversity officer? It's disgusting that you don't. And I'll never forget the response that was made. Look around you. We don't need a chief diversity officer because we are about equity. We are about inclusion. And this is a lifeline for so many different individuals that allows them to achieve their dreams. But at the end of the day, we have to be aware, what are the problematic areas? Where are the gaps? How do we develop innovative strategic solutions so that we can better what we're doing? And everybody has to be around the same table, having the same discussion. And that's probably the disconnect, is we're not always at the same table, always addressing what the ultimate goal is, and then creating the objectives that allow us to succeed achieving those goals.
Thank you. Well, as we start to wrap up our panel, thank you all also for being with us today. A quick rapid fire question. If you're looking at the next chapter, and kind of you're looking at Miami today, and you're looking at the next chapter of Miami, we've touched upon the role of the public sector, the role of the private sector, academic institutions, diversity, infrastructure, some of our challenges. What excites you most, and what keeps you up at night? Whoever wants to start.
Okay. We are, let's say, right now, when we talk about the investment in terms of infrastructure, technology coming to Miami-Dade County, Broward, and Palm Beach, there are a few challenges. These challenges is in terms of how we are going to bring the citizen to participate in this whole process. Cannot be something from the top down. We need to bring the citizen, and because of that, we need to educate. We need to engage, empower citizens to participate in the whole process. That's the way that I see. So sometimes when the people talk about smart city or smarter city, they think about just about the technology. My opinion is that, or my definition is a little bit different. The city is smart if the citizen is smart. Because of that, we need to use technology. It's a tool. It's very important. But we need to engage and empower citizens, communities, including the cities. So I see here this process is happening because there is a kind of open mind from the mayors in the county or the cities to change this, to engage people. And it's very interesting to participate in the meetings, in the city hall, and to discuss things related to climate, to environment, or the budget of the city. This is really happening here. And this is really very positive. We need to grow more because we need to have more people engaged. But it's already started. So I'm an optimist in terms of what's happening today.
All right, I'll start with what keeps me up at night because I want to end on a good note. I think a lot of people moved to Miami because they were fleeing certain things from other cities. I am hopeful, but it keeps me up at night that I worry we might repeat the same pattern. And I think we have to have a lot of foresight around changes that have to be instituted now so that we don't repeat those patterns. But what I'm excited about, so within the community of women that are part of Web3 Equity, we're starting to see companies and projects sprout up that address some of the underrepresented groups that we have not always seen at the forefront of company building and of creation. And so that inspires me, and I hope that's the next chapter.
That's good. So if you ask a C-level executive in industry, what keeps you up at night, you get two responses: cybersecurity and access to talent. You ask me what keeps me up at night, it's the volume of opportunities that we have that we're not captivating on right now. And with that, there's a word of caution. We need to be very, very careful about how we brand ourselves here in South Florida, because there's hype and then there's success, and we need to make sure that the hype is measuring the success so that people truly know that great things are going on here in South Florida. In terms of what I'm most excited about, it really goes back to what keeps me up at night, is the volume of activity that's occurring and the amazing opportunity to create South Florida as one single region. It's not Miami, it's not Fort Lauderdale, it's not West Palm Beach, it's South Florida as one region. And we talk about a tech hub. We're not a tech hub yet. We're on our way to becoming a tech hub, but I want to take this to another level. We're an innovation nation, just like Israel is known as the innovation nation. We're an innovative region, and it's only a matter of time before the region becomes designated a nationally ranked tech hub. The infrastructure, the successes, they're all happening. And within the next 3 to 5 years, I think we'll actually achieve the goal of that. But don't start calling ourselves one until we're there, because we still have a lot of infrastructure to build up. But we are so close to it, so don't screw it up, South Florida. We're doing a great job, and we're going to have local, regional, national, and international impact. And 5 years from now, it's going to be a completely different conversation about where we were 5 years ago. And something's going to happen unpredicted in the next 5 years. We don't know what it is. It could be another pandemic. It could be something else. It could be something very positive. We need to learn to be more proactive rather than reactive, but also be positioned to be reactive so that we can succeed, as we've already proven that we could do through a global pandemic with the successes we've achieved in the last 2 years.
Amazing. Well, thank you all three. Thank you, Michelle, John, and Bernardo. Please join me in thanking our panel.
Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay, and our panel discussion today will be wrapped up. We have the pleasure of being wrapped up by Mr. Andy Purdy, Chief Security Officer of Huawei Technologies. Thank you.
I must say this has really been an incredible experience being here, preparing for this session and sitting through it in person and virtually. It has led me to several conclusions. First of all, it's been too long since I've been here. And there are real reasons to come here that I didn't even realize before. I am traveling tonight to Palo Alto, where I'll be speaking to representatives of at least 35 media organizations, journalists. My opening remarks will be that you have to pay attention to South Florida, because this is really incredible. And the people I've met, bright and successful and interested, it's amazing. And I must say I'm humbled by, and somebody's going to put the time up so I don't use up too much time. I'm humbled by the fact that I'm going to make a couple of suggestions and comments, and although I've done a lot of research, there are people who are here who are far more expert than me, and so some of the suggestions I've made perhaps you've already done, so please forgive me. And second, I'm humbled by the fact that I only have a couple minutes to make my comments. I'm interested in the trust and strategic. To me, trust must be built in, and John made some comments about trust, but trust is about risk management, resilience, cybersecurity, and privacy. We have to make sure we build in the tools, processes, and technologies to make sure that we manage those things appropriately. In terms of strategic, and the panel was excellent, there are so many lessons to be learned. But in America, we don't learn enough lessons. I was struck by a book that was published decades ago, The Rational Optimist, How Prosperity Evolves, about the importance of specialization and exchange. And so when you look at something like globalization, 30 years of globalization, and you hear some select populists think globalization is terrible. The fact is, not led by governments. Globalization has led hundreds of millions, if not a couple of billion people out of poverty in the world in the last 30 years, despite issues about fair trade investment. So we have to learn things from, like the pandemic. What are lessons learned? And I hope this area, the academics and others, can contribute objective analysis of things like shutdowns. I heard the governor of New York says we shouldn't have had shutdowns. The school reports, I don't know what right is, but I don't see people really focusing enough on what are the lessons learned from these things. And I think that's very, very important. Just as in the beginning of the panel, you talked about lessons learned in terms of the experience here in South Florida, and trying to make sure that lessons are learned about what works, what doesn't work, and hopefully to have strategic plans that follow up. What's the strategy we're going to do to improve? So continuous improvement by having lessons learned, continuous improvement. And so something like globalization and the pandemic, we see that certain jobs left. And some people never got the good jobs back again. And so they're saying, okay, let's bring the jobs to the United States. Well, that's great, but we have to make intelligent decisions focused on what is in the best interest of the United States. I saw the CEO of Intel not too long ago was asked on CNBC, when will America be self-sufficient in semiconductors? He said never. And so the reality is we have an adjusting globalization chain that tries to take advantage of some of the things that we've learned that the panel talked about, that we need to have the supply chains that we can manage with disruptions. We need to learn lessons from the pandemic about how can we make sure we're ready, not that we would build everything or create everything in the United States, but to make sure that we are ready and we can manage our risk. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, the intelligent revolution. And so when you talk about what are the kinds of things that can benefit this area is working on them. And John and others talked about some of these things. 5G, what is 5G really? What are the benefits from 5G? It's about 5G-enabled technologies. It's about creating jobs. And I heard the emphasis yesterday and today about small and medium-sized enterprises in this area that are key to the growth. Well, that's key to 5G. Finding those sectors, those technologies, where the greatest opportunities are. Not that somebody's going to dictate, do this, do that. People are going to see the opportunities. If we can create an environment in the community, in the schools, in the dialogue between academia and the private sector and the government as to where are the opportunities, what lessons can we learn from other countries about where the success in 5G can be for us. I attended a conference in Austin in the spring, a 5G summit, where folks were talking about the fact that sometimes in the 5G spectrum, the benefits don't flow until later versions. So some were saying that not until 6G will we see the benefits from 5G. If we want to make great progress in this region, in this country, we have to know what the benefits are that can be had now. So companies and governments and customers and partners can talk about what are the ones that make the most sense? What are the business cases? So in terms of sectors, things like virtual healthcare, manufacturing, creating the efficiency, digitalization of these sectors, digitalization of energy, so we can try to meet the goals of the world, such as the ITU on telecom sector, the carbon reduction goals by 2030. If we work together, we can do these things. So commercialization, we also have to make sure we're working together, private sector and government and academia, on standards so that as we are trying to manage risk, as we are trying to promote efficiency, because if you have to create different standards in a whole lot of different countries, the suppliers are going to have much greater costs. In addition, for trust, we need to have objective standards. We need to have objective conformance programs. We need adequate transparency so we can see what's happening. In the world of privacy, we can't wait till there are data breaches. We need to have the ability to look at not just who owns the data, where is the data? How is it controlled? Where is it going? I hold some small hope that the talks taking place now between the U.S. government and TikTok for a potential national security agreement will come up with third-party oversight, independent testing, accountability. Because one thing we have to learn about trust is, in this world, this Web3 evolving world, the fact is, we have seen there's no such thing as a trusted supplier. You saw President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity where he talked about zero trust. People ask me, do I trust China? Do I trust Huawei? I don't trust anybody. We have to make sure we use those principles of zero trust, those technologies of independent conformance to make sure that what we need, when we need it, will be there. In terms of talent and education, and just tremendous points. And yesterday there was talk about lifelong learning and internships. The fact is, and I hope this region is, or if not, will become a leader, not just at the end of the pipeline, so that we can look around the room and see that we've got diversity, but those distressed communities that were talked about before, and not just the impact of pandemic, where the learning loss of our children was so great. We have to look at the reading and math scores of our elementary students. And we have to make sure not just the schools, but the communities help these kids. Particularly, it's a problem even before the pandemic in distressed communities, where these kids do not have a chance. They do not have a chance for equal opportunity. And we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we supply and understand what the community can give in terms of tutoring and teaching the teachers how to teach, and try to promote accountability, and trying to help in those early grades where we see too often, and again, I'm no expert, we see too often minority students moving away from science and tech and STEM. Too often girls moving away from science and technology. And I want the equality at the end, but we've got to help them in the elementary school. And we have to provide things like the additional training, not just internships, they're great, but summer camps, girls can code, internships, competitions for coding, competitions for hacking, boys and girls clubs, summer jobs, all these things. We as a community, hopefully this community can deal with something that the United States is not doing well enough. For the fourth industrial revolution, we need a future of work strategy. We need to bring skills to the underskilled and the undereducated, and those who are educated, we need to make sure folks have the skills that we need to move into 6.6G. If we want to compete successfully with China, we have to make sure that we step up and make these things happen for ourselves and our children and the future of America and those we love. Thank you very much.